Good evening, this is Chuck Crosley for Video Challenger Productions and another segment of Washington Heights and Inwood, Far Night in the Bronx. And if you're familiar with Washington Heights and Inwood, you'll definitely recognize the gentleman to my right, the Honorable Brian Murtaugh. We're pleased to have Brian with us this evening. And for those of you receiving the signal who don't live in the Washington Heights area, would like to know who is Brian Murtaugh. Maybe Mr. Murtaugh would like to tell us just who is Brian Murtaugh.
That's a great introduction, Chuck. Thank you. I'm the assemblyman for the only part of Manhattan that is in the Bronx, and that's Marble Hill, which is a very northern part of my district. I represent the 72nd Assembly District in northern Manhattan. That's the Washington Heights from 177th Street up, all of Inwood, and Marble Hill. The state assemblyman is a state legislator, but because of the nature of the job, I find myself also an ombudsman for the people who live in my district, for the people who live in the neighborhoods of Washington Heights and, of course, Inwood. I find myself sitting in a district office here in Inwood, being the only elected official in an area of about 40,000 people. And it is kind of strange because 40,000 people is more people than I had in my hometown of Elmira, New York. Now, Elmira is the biggest city in Chemung County in the southern tier. I always kind of remind myself of that. It's kind of strange. I am a New Yorker by adoption, and I have a very deep feeling and love for this neighborhood that almost as if I've come in and jumped into it. I'm constantly learning things about this area, Chuck, and I find it amazing. I believe we are one of the most pluralistic, unusually mixed group of people in the world. We are a traditional immigrant neighborhood. We speak, one time we tried to estimate how many languages we speak up here. And we stopped counting at 26. What you find is a relatively new neighborhood, especially Washington Heights and Inwood, really the turn of the century. We were developed when the subways came through, mass transit. Mm-hmm. There are a few older parts of the neighborhood who are along Broadway, which is the stage line, old Route 1 up to Albany. Marble Hill was actually an older neighborhood. It was one of the old villages going up the Hudson River when the river was full of sloops, sailing ships, and the river traffic was by sail. And one day Marble Hill woke up and found the city of New York had kind of just grown up around it and kept on going up to the Yonkers line. This neighborhood here developed really in two parts. One was the oldest part, which was east of Broadway, around the IRT, the elevated subway there. And the newer part in when the A train came through, west of Broadway. And in some cases, the neighborhood still reflects that. If you can imagine for a minute groups of people coming through, for whatever reasons, most of them immigrant groups, you leave your homeland because you almost have to. You're being forced out by something. And you come for the same reasons. You come for hope, you come for opportunity, you come for hopefully something better for yourself and for your family and for your children. And as each group came through, they stayed here for a while, and then many moved on. But each left a part of themselves, whether it's in the population that's left behind, whether it's, in some cases you see it in the businesses that are there, or in some groups did establish institutions. We have on 187th Street, right off St. Nicholas Avenue, one of the larger and more prestigious Armenian churches in New York City. Most people don't know about it.
And it's right
here,
bordering on one of the largest Jewish intellectual communities also.
Yes, Yeshiva University, absolutely. We have one of the very largest Greek Orthodox churches, St. Spiridon's, and a school attached to that. We have a number of synagogues, and of course the institution of world-renowned higher education, Yeshiva University. You have a number of smaller churches associated with groups, like Good Shepherd has traditionally been an Irish church. Now it's a mixture. And you find Wynn St. Elizabeth's, which is now a very heavy Hispanic population, yet still has some of the residue when the Irish were first there. That was the oldest Catholic church in the area. It was first started. All these things I find very, very interesting. And I like it especially that all these these different kind of people who came from different parts of the world, starting off from the very first groups up here who were Irish and Jewish and Greek and Italian, to the more later groups, the Jewish coming over first from Nazi Germany, refugees from the Holocaust, later from Eastern Europe after World War II. Even the later groups from the Caribbean, first from Puerto Rico, then from Cuba, and now from Santo Domingo, a very large immigrant population. And the very newest, the Russian Jewish group, when we were the second largest settlement of Russian Jews in New York City when the gates of immigration were open. And if the gates are opened out of Russia again, we hopefully will continue to play that role, a very important role in the life of the Jewish community of welcoming the newest immigrants coming in. But all this group of people coming together and living in a relatively small geographic area, it becomes a melting pot, literally, which each group keeping tabs on their roots, on their nationalities, who they are and what they are, many speaking the native languages still, and learning to live together in peace in a rather small area surrounded by water on three sides, and dominated by the geography of the area, which is the two great hills in Washington Heights, East Heights and West Heights, and then, of course, the hills of Inwood Hill Park and of Marble Hill.
Well, Mr. Murtaugh, you're certainly very well versed in the history of the community and how it's developed over the years. And what do you see as the current problems that we're facing and how we're dealing with them right now?
The problems are twofold, and it's amazing that both are coming together at the same time. We are a poverty neighborhood, and that is problem number one. And I emphasize that because the problems of poverty are the problems that to a large extent come across this desk here. And we have a particular problem with that because we became poor too late. When the poverty of this neighborhood was finally documented through census figures, through a number of other ways of showing it, the money that was available from the federal government and even from the state and city government had begun to dry up. The money that was available through private groups was beginning to dry up. So we find that we have to work even harder to try to get things for people here, which are very, very needed, which are very real. The older poverty neighborhoods of Harlem, East Harlem, El Barrio, Bedford-Stuyvesant, of East New York section of Brooklyn, of the South Bronx, they still have their problems, even though half the population is left. A lot of that population has come here, and the money didn't follow it. Therefore, you have situations like the only legal aid we have is the Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation. That's only for tenants, and it's money that Senator Leiter and I put in the state budget every year. And now
it's doing very well, by the way.
Thank you.
And a lot of people have spoken to us about the merits of it.
Yeah,
Thanks to you guys.
It's very, very necessary. Councilman Michaels has now managed to put some money just this last year in the city budget, and it's helped somewhat, but the amount of work they have to do is enormous. We don't have legal services up here. We don't have Harlem Services of Youth. Only what we can scratch and put together ourselves. And the whole areas out there which aren't being covered, matrimonial problems, consumer fraud. We just barely touch the service, and we're overburdened just doing landlord tenant, and it's an enormous amount of work. That's a good example. Second example of our needs in the health area and the mental health area. It's kind of funny, you can document in the last 10 years the decline in health care and the rebirth of something there, what we're trying to do to address it. We've lost all our community hospitals. The last one was closed with Jewish Memorial just a few years ago, after 5 years of bankruptcy. Before then, my first year in the Assembly in 1981, St. Elizabeth's. Mm-hmm. After our community fight to keep it open, and where Councilman Michaels and I were sued for $400,000 apiece because we kept it open too long. Answer to that, we're left with one large institution, Presbyterian Hospital, Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center, a teaching institution, a world prestigious institution, but not a community group.
Now, how do you feel about that?
Well, it's interesting the way that they have responded, and I think they have responded very well. One is that they have agreed and are just this month starting the construction for a new community hospital, which is going to be on the very northernmost end of Baker Field, up there, right up by where the river, Harlem River goes by the bridge, and it should be opening in 3 years. I think it's going to be key to the renaissance of healthcare in this district. The second, and more importantly, though, is something that's taken us this last 5 years since I've been in the Assembly of intensive effort of trying to get something in place to address the most serious health problem we have. That is the lack of health care in the district and ability to pay for it. We are a health manpower shortage area. It means we don't have enough doctors. We're officially designated that by the federal government. More importantly, and probably what led to that, is that 25% of our people have no health care insurance whatsoever. They are the working poor. That means they work. They make enough money, just enough money, so they're not eligible for Medicaid. But even if they work 2 jobs, none of the jobs would have any health care insurance with it, because they're marginal employees. So when they get sick, where do they go? They go to the emergency room of the local hospital. What we're trying to set up, and we'll have established this year, is something called an Ambulatory Care Network Corporation, where we homestead doctors into the district that have agreement that up to 40% of their practice will be the people who are self-pay, which means no pay. They can maybe pay $5 or $10 for a doctor's visit. They can't pay the 40, 50, or 60 that a regular would cost for a regular doctor visit. The difference has to be picked up through a rather ingenious financing plan, basically through the state's bad debt and charity care pool. It is not a problem unique to us. It's a problem in many of the working class neighborhoods, especially the Northeast. And it's a problem that has been made worse by the federal government running away from the responsibilities for health care, as they've run away from the responsibilities of housing. But it's a problem we have started to deal with, and I think if we do it right here, and it works out well, which I think it will, we could become a model for the rest of this country. And they will start looking at Washington Heights and Inwood and saying, aha, we can do it this way. We can start serving that part of the population, the working poor who have no health care. What I'd really like to see in this area is the place to invest your money is prenatal care. And they call postpartum, which is just right after the child has been born, the first few months. Studies show that for every $1 you put into prenatal care, you will save $3.39 in health care costs later on for that child. It's incredible that we don't put money into this.
It's amazing statistics.
Yeah, it is. The lack of prenatal care in this area is frightening. And it's something I would very, very much like to do something about. And now that we have started with the Ambulatory Care Network Corporation coming online, that has to be the next challenge in healthcare in the area. Mental health area is even worse. The Inwood Mental Health District, 181st Street to the river, it's as if it didn't exist. There is no hospital that today has primary responsibility for the mental health beds for this area. And it shouldn't be. It's not supposed to be. There's supposed to be somebody somewhere has primary responsibility and a great plan for the city.
The Psychiatric Institute of Columbia Presbyterian has...
They've assumed some responsibility right now. They don't have the beds online to assume full responsibility here. A recent innovation is when they put 7 beds aside for us. What we're going to have is when Columbia Presbyterian finishes its mainframe hospital on 168th Street and the community hospital on 220th Street, there will be enough beds there that they will have an emergency room, psychiatric emergency room. They'll be able to take people in and place them in the beds if they need to have hospitalization. This is of enormous importance right now because if people get very ill, and mental illness is an illness just like any other illness. It is an illness. And if people get ill right now, they could go to Bellevue, they could go to Harlem Hospital, they go to Metropolitan, and sometimes they can get shuttled among all 3 and they can get bounced around.
Regardless, they're leaving the neighborhood, they're leaving their roots.
Yeah.
And they're wandering around some strange neighborhood if they be an outpatient.
Yeah. Or if the people who care for them, the family members, it's not here in their own neighborhood. I'd like to have some place here where they can have good aftercare, where everything's tied in together. Not like you said, just wandering all over the system. It's funny. What I've done as state assemblyman is that I have started concentrating on these things after I got up to the assembly, because not things I really knew about that much when I got elected. I had a background in housing, in parks, and sanitation, and regular city services. Partly from being Democratic district leader before I was an assemblyman, partly from being a tenant activist. I've done tenant organizing for about 16 years now, and I still do it as state assemblyman. I enjoy it. It's part of the basis of what I do in service in this district. But I found that I had to learn about a lot of new things when I came to assembly, and 2 of them were healthcare and mental health. And to do both, I joined the committees in the assembly. I fought to get on the healthcare committee, and then I fought to get on the mental health committee. I'm on both. And by the way, I just joined a new committee last week at my request. That's children and families. Because I want to learn how to get more services and things in this district, in that area. Because we have a lot of children here, and we have a lot of families in trouble. And I want to have my input in that part of it too.
Bravo. You mentioned earlier, before this interview when I spoke to you, there's sort of a twofold thrust. The fact that this neighborhood is poor too late, and thereby receiving funds sporadically, or not receiving them at all. And then the fact that there is some sort of arriving bit of affluence coming. How would that arriving affluence influence the future of the Washington Heights, Inwood, Marble Hill area?
I think it's going to be very positive if we do it right. The newest migration to the area are people coming from the west side of Manhattan, other areas, being want to live in Manhattan, are being priced out of the Midwest side. Perhaps my wife and I were predecessors of that. We moved up here only about a dozen years ago.
Pioneers.
Pioneers. We lived at 73rd and Columbus, the same apartment I had when I was a graduate student at Columbia, and we needed a bigger apartment after we got married. It was just impossible, a dozen years ago. And the choice is, if you want to live in Manhattan, you can either live on the Lower East Side, on Avenue A, Avenue B, Avenue C, or you can live in Washington Heights and Inwood. And I think we're a much better choice because everything else we have is so much better. A lot of people are moving up here now that normally 20 years ago would have moved to the west side. Some are buying co-ops, as the area co-oping is now coming to this area. I think it can be positive because we are going to be different from the west side. What is going to be different for us is that we're not going to allow them to kick out the people who already live here. They're not going to see the gut rehab of occupied buildings like you had in the west side when I first got started in the tenant movement. And where the older ethnics, the older Irish and Jewish and Hispanics of the west side get forced out and the poor people get forced out. We're, I think, going to see a natural replacement, which I think is going to be good. There are going to be some problems involved in that, especially in co-oping, because the co-op law we have right now is a bad law. It requires only 15% of the units, including empty units, to be sold for a co-op to be declared effective. That's not good. And I think of some bad plans that we adopted because of that. But if we do our job right, and the tenants who live in the buildings which have a non-eviction co-op plan offered and adopted, work at it to make sure it's a good plan for the building, that the moderate rehab is provided for if not actually done, then I think the new people moving the neighborhood will stay here, will put their roots down, and I welcome their energy, and I welcome their, I think they'll get to love this neighborhood like the rest of us do, and I think that it can be even more exciting in the future. Certainly we'll be more economically integrated, and that's going to be a very, very good thing. I look forward to that, I really do.
How does your...
One last part, the unfortunate part. We do need to do something about commercial rent control, because one of the problems we have here, we don't have gentrification with our storefronts, we have greedification. There's just too many landlords all of a sudden thinking get top dollar, and boy are they going for it. I have an example. The office you have here, I get forced out of my office across the street. I had a storefront up to about a year and a half ago.
We'll remember that.
I liked it here at 656 West 204th Street. It's a professional apartment. I no longer could afford a storefront. It just cost too much. I got priced on the market. I like this because it's bigger.
Perhaps you should have set up some newspapers and candy on the outside.
Well, the way it was explained to me by one of the local merchants, he said, Brian, you don't have to worry. Your customers will follow you. They'll find you. If they need you, they'll find you. He says, I got to worry. I mean, this happened to be a liquor store owner who, he said, there are a couple other liquor stores around. If I'm not in a convenient location, I'm in big trouble. But Brian, the people that want to talk to you, they'll find you. And he's right.
They obviously have. We had no trouble whatsoever. How has your housing agenda affected the problem that you just spoke about?
I think it's key. And I find myself doing two things. One is trying to change the law in Albany. And the second is to try to work within the law to make it work for us here. I think this area is going to see a lot of moderate rehab. And that is the most difficult thing to address politically and personally for the people who have to live through it. But I think it's absolutely essential. Think about it a minute for the buildings that we live in here. The shell of the building, the outside walls, are very strong and stable. They will probably last another 100 years, perhaps 150 years. Certainly much longer than the youngest person living here now. The problem is that the things that make the building habitable, livable, the essential systems don't last that long and they've got to be replaced. That is the heating system, which is your boiler, your burner, your pipes go up, they are called risers, they go down, they're called stackers for some obscure reason. The electrical system, including the elevator. These must be replaced every 40 to 50 years. And this neighborhood, many buildings are 50 to 60 to 70 years old, and now we're at the replacement period for some of the older buildings. You also need to have reinvestment in the vulnerable points of the building. That's your roof, your windows, and something called pointing, which is not your bricks, but between the bricks, the mortar, especially where the wall faces the northwest winds.
Where the moisture comes in.
Yeah, you can tell you got a pointing problem if around top between your roof and your ceiling and your window, you start seeing evidence of moisture coming in. That's one place where it seems to come in for some reason, and your paint will start bubbling, your plaster will start coming out, it's showing moisture to the other side. It means you need to be pointing to the outside. We need to do this, and we do this properly. One, there's no dislocation, no relocation. That's very, very important. It's difficult to live through, but once it's done, you've expanded the living span of the building for another 50, 60 years. And then it's be some other assemblyman's job to worry about it. I'll be gone by that time.
Perhaps.
Maybe. I intend to stay a long time, but not that long.
Well, Ronald Reagan has been here with us for a while.
Sure, well, I'll be the other side of the coin from Ronald Reagan. The problem becomes there's three problems in that. One is you have to get the landlord to do it. Two, you have to have competent workmen to do it, competent work, and that's difficult because the construction industry is not set up to do it. They love their gut rehab jobs or brand new work. They're not used to coordination that's important when somebody's living in an apartment where all this work's being done. The third thing is how do you pay for it? It's along those lines that we're still doing a lot of work, and I quite frankly think the city has been a bit too generous in what they've given landlords to actually pay for it. And that's something I'm trying to address in Albany and change that law. I want the tenants to get more of the tax abatement that's available, the J51 tax abatement. I want it, quite frankly, when the new boiler is paid for, I want it dropped off your rent roll. Right now, the landlord can pass on 90% of the certified cost to the tenants, and they pay it indefinitely. That's wrong. It's dumb. I want it to charge the cost lower. Also, I want to find some way of subsidizing the tenants who cannot afford to pay. All these come together for especially senior citizens in that area. All these come together in kind of a housing package. It also has to do with co-oping. There's one thing we noticed here is a lot of people are buying buildings, speculators buying buildings just to co-op them. And they're buying them about the time when you need this reinvestment, and they're not doing it. And if they don't do it, it worries me if they take out the equity out of the building and the profits out of the building in the next 40 to 50 years, then how are we going to get done? The people who live there as tenants have to pay even more, and the people who are there as co-opers get stuck with a big bill. I want to make sure that doesn't happen. That's why, until I'm successful changing the law, I've decided that every single building that has a red herring that I hear about, I want to go into to help the tenants organize in that particular way to work on that red herring and black book on the co-oping. Not that they can stop it. 15%, but the units, including the empty units, you probably can't. But to make sure you can bargain to a good plan for the building. And at the end of the bargaining plan, period, you can decide to buy or not buy according to your own economic circumstances and inclinations, and you intend to live there as tenants, and most of us, quite frankly, the oldest people especially, will live here the rest of their lives as tenants. You have a lifetime lease. It's yours as long as you want it, to make sure you're going to be living in a good building. And that's the one chance you have an opportunity to affect that. That's why that's so very, very important. Those are the challenges of the new people.
Well, we've addressed the issue of the arriving affluence, and what about the arriving problem with the affluence, the arriving immigrants, and the arriving problem of drugs in this area that we're all very aware of?
That's not arriving, it's arrived.
It has been, yes.
Yeah, it's been a problem. I don't suppose you can talk about problems of any of the inner city neighborhoods without mentioning drugs. And we have it particularly bad up here because we are centrally located. We have a lot of people come in for supermarket, shopping, especially in the lower part of Washington Heights in the area from 155th Street to about 160th Street, 161st, east of Broadway. It's an area they now call the war zone. It's been written up in a series of articles in the Daily News. Half the people going in there buying have New Jersey plates. You see some young white teenage guys coming out of a car in that neighborhood. You got to know they're not there just walking around the neighborhood.
Not looking to buy a co-op.
Right, right. What's particularly bad about that part of the neighborhood is that a number of empty apartments have been taken over by drug dealers. And we have tried to mobilize the drug enforcement available to the city, including federal drug enforcement, working with Congressman Rangel, who chairs that subcommittee in the Congress, to put more work in that area. We want to coordinate, first of all, the buys, and then to make sure that when they get into court, that they're treated seriously and not just revolving to our justice. And thirdly, to make sure some people do some jail time on it. We're not going to solve the drug problems of the city of New York, and certainly not the United States of America. What we do want to do is force them out of this neighborhood and say, folks, there's a better way to make a living some other place, not here. Make it too hot for them. Just get them out. We also have a drug problem in other parts of the neighborhood that hasn't made the media, which is just important, especially if it's on your corner. And one thing I have done is I work with neighborhood groups who have buying and selling in the neighborhood, and I try to get busts from the, I do get busts from the Special Narcotics Division. It's not the regular 34th Police Precinct. The guy driving by can't do anything about it. It has to be a Special Narcotics officer. But you can get those, and then you can, quite frankly, push the special prosecution people, the district attorney's office, to make sure that these cases are treated seriously. And I'm going to continue doing that because people, we must realize, while the number one drug problem is 155th Street in the Dodge City area, we still have it in other parts of the district, and I'm not going to let them do business as usual while we're concentrating on the worst part, the lower part of the district. We're going to do it across the board, and I see that as part of my job as state assemblyman to do that. I called today on some busts where there was one corner within 3 blocks of here where a group of neighborhood people brought dealing on that corner to my attention. There was a bust made Thursday night. The person, there's a third narcotics bust, and they also had a felony because they had a gun, and so he's in jail. I want to make sure that that is pushed properly. It's a B felony, and I want to see some time done on that one. Unfortunately, as I drove by there on Saturday, I saw a drug deal go down myself. I stopped for a red light, 2 of them. The one thing I was positive on, at least while I was watching them, the guy got nervous, talked to his lookout, and then ran.
So you're really on the street. You're a very visible person in more ways than one.
When you're tall and bald, it's hard to miss you. What I'm told is that the dealer there, the new one, is brand new, and that will probably take 4 to 5 drug busts in that particular corner before the word gets out. These guys can make $300 to $400 a day dealing on the streets, and they're not the people running the business. They're just the frontline people that we're busting. And they're busting a small amount of money and a small amount of the stuff because they get replenished all the time. These people know, the drug dealers know the law very, very well, and they try to use it against us. We have to operate within the law, but we have to operate to protect the neighborhood. That's exactly what we're going to do.
And I understand through your efforts and some other local politicos, we've got a little bit of reinforcement in the 34th Precinct. We've got some extra guys over there working now.
One thing we do is that elected officials in the area, Senator Leiter, Councilman Michaels, myself, in this case with 34th Police Precinct, Assemblyman Denny Farrell and State Senator Olga Mendez, we work together as a team. And when we go down for more police, we're also joined by the representatives of Congressman Rangel and Congressman Weiss. And we go in there and we say, here are our problems. We come in with the people from the Community Planning Board, first Monsignor Leonard, and then Mike Rosas, who was succeeded him as chairperson. We see what our problems are. We know that new policemen coming on out of twice a year, the new classes coming out of the police academy. They go for a number of months in neighborhood teams, and then they're assigned to precincts. And we want our fair share. We have a large district. It's very difficult to cover because of the geographic parts of it. They've now given us extra 10 blocks. We picked up that 10 blocks from 165th to 155th Street because of coterminality. I oppose that coterminality. It's dumb. Makes it our police precinct is 182nd Street, and down to 155th Street has to cover all the way down there. And the old police precinct was 10 blocks south of that, so it's crazy.
Police gerrymandering?
I don't know what it was, but it's I didn't like it at the time, and they did it, and therefore they're going to have to give us the resources to do the job, and we're going to insist upon them. More police is part of it, but also attention from the prosecutors is part of it. The district attorney's office, and perhaps even the courts themselves. We don't care. We want to really press forward, get some action.
All right.
Let's talk about something really pleasant. Let's talk about parks.
Okay. Well, as you know, Challenger Productions, one of the areas of this neighborhood that we donate a lot of our airspace to is the neighborhood parks. And Mr. Murtaugh, how do you see, well, also being the 50th anniversary of Fort Tryon Park, the summer projects that have been going on. How do you foresee the future of the parks in the neighborhood, the things that people appreciate so much about the 600 wonderful acres that we have up down here?
Our parks are great. They're one of the things that sold my wife and I in this neighborhood when we first moved up here. We walked around here, and we really had three things were important to us. One was an apartment at a price we could afford, and we found one, a two-bedroom apartment, which much less than anything close. We were looking at the west side. The second thing was the mass transit, the A train, where it was really only 20 minutes from the end of the line to 7th Street to the Lincoln Center area near where we lived. And I figured I would do 20 minutes each way each day if I had to, and to live in this kind of neighborhood. The third thing was the parks. We walked by 207th Street and Isom Street on Seaman on the 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, and there were empty courts there on the tennis courts. You could walk by on and play. Now we lived by Central Park at the time, and you want to play tennis in Central Park, you get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and you stand in line for 3 hours. This was incredible to us. We looked around the hill country, the wooded hills with the side there, the lagoon in Inwood Hill Park, Fort Tryon Park with its sculptured gardens and the cloisters sitting there. We saw the other small parks kind of dotting the area. And of course the Highbridge Park with its sheer cliffs and very different kind of vista there. We said, boy, what an asset, what a place to live. A great place to raise a family. And that's one of the three things that sold us here. I find myself a state assemblyman 12 years later. One, doing a lot of tenant work and tenant organizing, which I do every week. I'm probably at 2 or 3 tenant meetings within 2 or 3 days while I'm in Albany, more when we're not in session. I find myself working in the rated train survey to try to make especially the poor service in the A train better. And I just finished writing a letter to Mr. Kiley on the results of my last survey in the rated train, in which we're going to discuss with Mr. Kiley at length. And Mr. Gunn will be up in the neighborhood, the president of the Transit Authority will be up in the neighborhood in a community meeting on transportation sometime in April. I haven't set the place or date yet, but he's committed to it. And I find myself working on the parks. The problem with the parks is that if you don't, the problem is this: it is easier right now to get money for capital improvements than it is for ongoing maintenance. We have a number of capital improvements either happening in the park. We have brand new rejuvenated tennis courts. Mm-hmm. We have $1 million committed from Isham Park. We have more coming along the pipeline for the money for Inwood Park itself. We've had a lot of money being put in the upper part of Inwood Park in the soil erosion projects. Our problem is to get a park person assigned to those tennis courts, permanent recreation person. Our problem is to get park people assigned to constant maintenance and cleanup in the area. And that's a problem citywide in the way we have addressed our parks as a city. The parks were mainly built about 40 to 50 years ago to be manpower intensive. In other words, you see a comfort station and perhaps a playground there, you know that was meant to have somebody assigned to work there. When they started cutting back, 19 years ago, they started cutting back on the amount of parks personnel. Every single year, the parks budget went down. It got worse in 1975 when the budget crunch hit us. It kept on going down dramatically. And then in 1979 and 1980, when the rest of the city departments, you saw an upswing in their budget lines, the Parks Department kept on going down. And it finally got down to something where you saw a parkie under the age of 40, it had to be somebody, a CETA worker. It wasn't a Parks Department person. It was very, very bad. It was dumb. 3 years ago, I helped form a group called the 1% Club. We basically maintain the city has to spend at least 1% of its operating budget on its parks. It's one of the great assets of the whole city, and we can't let them go. And especially for this neighborhood. It shows just you get your money back as a city just from the better values of land and what your taxes that people pay living next to a park. It's a well-maintained park. You can rebuild a neighborhood from a park. But you let the park go, it'll hurt the neighborhood. And you can't have that. And we have lost parks in the city. Sarah Delano Roosevelt Park on the Lower East Side was bulldozed. That is incredible. Well, it's not going to happen here. Partly because we have organized as a community. We've had some very, very good park groups. We publicized it. Thanks very, very much to Manhattan, Northern Manhattan groups like yourself, where they know that parks aren't in the Bronx, and Washington Heights and Inwood aren't in the Bronx with our parks. That let them know there are other parks besides Central Park they have to pay attention to. We have volunteer groups that actually go and clean it up themselves. And the first things I started doing when I moved to the neighborhood, I joined a cleanup group and I was out there raking up. One of the reasons that I was a co-sponsor of the bottle bill, the first bill I sponsored in the legislature, as I said on the floor of assembly, I picked up a lot of Coke cans, a lot of beer cans, and people asked me, well, why don't you have return deposits on mayonnaise jars? I could tell them. In a number of years of cleaning up parks, I never once picked up a mayonnaise jar. Always Coke and beer. So that's where the return of a bottle law is all about, in case you ever wanted to know. The parks themselves, I think we're getting in better shape now. I think that we still need a lot of the volunteer work. The Heights Inwood Parks Alliance, the Friends of Inwood Trail Park, one of the oldest groups we had, the Friends of Fort Tryon Park, one of the newer ones, the most active, who've done such a great job in the Heather Garden. I think their work is starting to show, and the city is paying attention. For a couple of years, the Heather Garden in Fort Tryon Park was almost overgrown with weeds. And you can't have a garden like that overgrown. You've got to put the personnel, the gardeners, to do the work, or bulldoze it, put grass in there. I told this to Henry Stern, the Parks Commissioner, and he kind of blanched. He lives in that area, and more importantly, he's very proud of having lived here and raised here, and his mother likes to walk that area. So she lives in the neighborhood. But he finally started putting some permanent parks personnel in there as gardeners, and we're starting to come back. For 2 years, strictly the Fort Tryon, Friends of Fort Tryon Park people who are keeping it really, looking good and looking decent and getting cleaned up and pulling the weeds and getting it going. I see more need to do that. We have the money coming back in and reinvestment as far as rehabilitation. We still have to convince the city to put more money into its parks and put their fair share of it up here. They used to have a very nasty habit of stealing the parks people for special events done in such a park.
Yes, I understand that was still going on for a while, up until recently.
Yeah, well, I have an agreement. The city has signed an agreement with me that the basic personnel we had up here, they will not steal. The extra personnel that we've got, they would take for the special events. That was the agreement. And as we've started to build up, they won't take us below the minimum, but they're free to take a certain share of the extra people that we've managed to get up here. And that's why it's working right now. I remember I used to walk to the park on a Monday morning. It would look like a war zone. And we even now pay teenagers, their own kids, to clean up in the parks on weekends, while a lot of people from outside come and use the parks. And I don't blame them. I mean, they're beautiful parks. They're here. They're a resource to the entire city. They are welcome here. All we ask is to cooperate with us and work with us to try to keep them clean and keep them so they're good for everybody to live in. And, that means that those extra few steps of picking up your picnic stuff and putting it in the trash can. Community provided the trash can. All those painted number 10 cans you see, that came from us. And then you had to make sure that the Parks Department picked it up, which they do. It's a constant battle. We have a lot more work to go, but you can see some results now. It's going to get better.
The rest is your own civic responsibility.
Yeah, but it's a pleasure. And by the way, if you walk around the lagoon and Inwood Park, you can see not only wild ducks, which are almost in permanent residence, but you can even see in the late winter and the early spring swans which have come back. They're in the migration pattern. Last year the first pair came, a mating pair, and this year they brought the kids back. And it's nice to see. Nice sign.
That's tremendous. I saw pheasants. I saw 2 pheasant within the last 2 weeks.
Great.
Also.
Great.
Maybe they were visiting. I don't know if they were scouting out new territory.
New migrants. Absolutely. It's the immigrant neighborhood. They're coming back. Yeah. We have pheasants. We have. I've seen some loons there, and we have some raccoons. It's interesting. And this is Manhattan. This is the center of one of the most heavily populated areas in the world. Or not Tokyo, that heavy type of population, where we are heavily populated inner city neighborhood, and this parkland is incredible. I get a particular joy out of it. I love wooded hills. And my wife and I, we waited in a waiting list for an apartment at Indian Road and 218th Street for 3 years, just so we have a great view of the park. And that's what we've got now. And I got to tell you, folks, I'm not moving. No way are you going to be out of this neighborhood.
Okay, that's great. Earlier you said that the parks sort of dictate the future of the neighborhood. When the parks go, they can bring down the decline of the neighborhood.
Yes, they can.
And you're very optimistic about the parks right now. How do you see the whole neighborhood?
Optimistic and determined.
And determined, definitely.
The whole neighborhood?
Just to sum it up right now.
Okay. I think we have some real problems we got to address. The school problems are incredible. We could spend a whole program talking the problems of public education here. Our lack of early child education is just beginning to get now. We need that. But I think we're going to solve our school problems. We're one of the few overcrowded districts of school in New York, city, New York. The 32 school districts, 28 of which have too few kids, 4 of which are overcrowded and growing. That's us. We're one of the 4. We're the most overcrowded. We're going to solve those kind of problems. We're going to, I think, be one that continue to be a pluralistic neighborhood with many different languages and many different people. We're going to be a very exciting neighborhood to live in. I think that a lot of different things will be happening here. We're an artist. More and more people into the arts are coming here. Surprisingly, people into music, more so than sculpture or dance. They're coming in this area. We started our own symphony orchestra just this year. We hope to get permanent funding from it next year.
We have them on tape.
Yep. An interesting group of people, all of whom live here. It's incredible.
The Washington Heights
and it's a
Symphony Orchestra.
good product, a good sound that they have, absolutely. I think that you will see a neighborhood uniquely integrated economically, culturally, different religions, different, across the board. Age, you're not going to have all young and yuppies, you're not going to have all senior citizens very old, you're not going to have all poor, you're not going to have all wealthy. It's going to be a nice integration. We're not going to kick out the people who already live here. We're going to make sure that does not happen like it happened on the West Side. That I can vow to you. I just got my tenant work started. Those kind of the gentrification wars on the West Side. It's not being repeated here, and I take pride in that. I like that. I think it's going to be exciting. And what people are going to have to realize, it's something I realized this last summer when we reclaimed Marble Hill, when the Bronx tried to grab it. We put the flag of Manhattan back on top of Marble Hill, and I can tell you that this is going to be the jewel of Manhattan, and people are going to know that Washington Heights and Inwood and Marble Hill are not in the Bronx, and maybe even Riverdale will petition to join us.
Thank you very much. I think that couldn't be summed up in a better way. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Murtaugh. The Honorable Brian Murtaugh.
Thank you, Chuck. Good talking to you.